Did you know that Ramses the Great is the only pharaoh in history to be issued a modern passport 3,000 years after he died? Why? Because his mummified body needed to travel to Paris for preservation, and under international law, even a dead person must have an ID to cross borders. So the Egyptian government decided to give him one. Occupation? King. Deceased. And the reason was pretty serious. His body was deteriorating from a fungal infection, and France had the expertise to stop the damage. But when he arrived in Paris, they didn't just wheel him into a lab like a regular person. He was welcomed with full military honors. That's right, a literal mummy got a head of state reception. Once stabilized, French scientists confirmed Ramses had arthritis, bad teeth, and old battle injuries. After treatment, the pharaoh flew home to Cairo, passport stamped, where he now rests in the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization. I think we can all agree that this makes him the most powerful pharaoh in Egyptian history, since he's the only one that got to fly first class. Believe it or not, but the man who invented the Pringles can is actually buried inside of one. Frederick Bauer, the American chemist who invented the iconic Pringles can, was so proud of his creation that he requested to be buried inside of a Pringles can when he died. When he eventually passed away in 2008 at the age of 89, his family decided to honor his request by giving him exactly what he wanted. So on their way to the funeral home, they stopped at a grocery store, bought a can of original flavor Pringles, placed some of his ashes inside, and then buried the can into the ground. Apparently, they understood the weirdness of this request because the rest of his ashes were placed in a traditional urn and buried alongside his wife. Today, the Pringles can remains one of the most recognizable food containers in the world, being sold in more than 140 different countries with more than 100 different flavors. The first motion picture wasn't born in Hollywood. It actually came from a horse race. By the mid-1800s, humanity had already mastered photography, but no one had put them together in the form of video footage yet. Then came English photographer Edward Muybridge, who set out to prove a bet. You see, before this, no one really knew how horses moved their legs in gallop, as it was too fast to see with the naked eye. So Muybridge became determined to prove that when horses gallop, there is a moment when all four hooves are off the ground at the same time. In 1878, he set up 24 cameras along a racetrack, each connected to tripwires triggered by a galloping horse. When he developed the images and ran them through his own invention, the zoopraxiscope, the still photos came to life in motion. Just 2 seconds long, it was the first moving picture ever recorded. And yes, the horse really did fly for a split second. But that tiny clip didn't just settle a bet. It was the birth of cinema. Everyone knows that Christmas is always on December 25th, but what many people don't know is that number was basically pulled out of a hat. The Bible is completely silent on when Jesus was born, and the details it does give, like shepherds chilling in the fields with their flocks, point way more towards a spring birth. So according to the Bible, Jesus was more likely born in March, April, or May. So why are we all exchanging gifts in the dead of winter? Because the early church pulled off a genius corporate takeover. The Romans already had a wildly popular week-long pagan festival called Saturnalia, a bender of feasting, drinking, and pure chaos that conveniently ended around December 25th. Instead of trying to cancel the empire's favorite party, the church just went with the flow and slapped a major holy day right on top of it. It was a brilliant idea because if you can't beat them, join them. Julius Caesar was once captured by pirates at the age of 25, but funnily enough, the pirates had absolutely no idea who he was, and Caesar eventually had them executed by crucifixion upon his release. In the 1st century BC, the Mediterranean Sea had a pirate problem. The rugged region of southern Anatolia was undefeated with seagoing pirates whose depredations terrified the Romans. One day, a band of Sicilian pirates managed to capture the 25-year-old nobleman named Julius Caesar and told him that his ransom was set to the sum of 20 talents. Caesar found it incredibly insulting that they had no idea who he was and told them that raising the price to 50 talents would better fit his status. He even joked with them that one day he would have them all crucified, which the pirates found highly amusing. However, Once he was released, Caesar proved that he was serious. He immediately assembled a small fleet and captured most of the pirates, and ordered for all of them to be crucified. As an act of mercy, he reportedly had their throats slit first in order to spare them the agony of a full, prolonged crucifixion. When most people think of Mozart, we imagine a brilliant mind who composed some of history's most complex pieces of classical music. But what if I told you that he had a secret passion for writing vulgar and sometimes explicit songs? One of the most infamous examples is a song called Leck mist im Arsch, which translates to Lick Me in the Ass. And if that wasn't enough, he produced a follow-up called Lick My Ass Right, Well and Clean. And this wasn't just a one-off occurrence. Several of Mozart's letters and compositions reveal a crude sense of humor that might surprise those who only know him for his symphonies and operas. Gladiators fighting to the death is probably the biggest lie Hollywood has ever sold you about Rome. Sure, it happened, but it was incredibly rare. Why? Because it was bad for business. Think of gladiators not as disposable cannon fodder, but as the Tom Bradys and LeBron Jameses of their day. These guys were mega superstar athletes who were astronomically expensive to buy, train, and keep healthy. Their owners weren't about to let their multi-million-dollar investment get poured down the drain. Most fights were more like a high-stakes boxing match, judged on points, skill, or whoever gets knocked out first. These guys were valuable assets in the sporting world of ancient Rome, and not just bodies to be thrown away for a cheap entertainment. Have you ever been sold a bridge? George C. Parker was one of the most audacious con men in American history. Many people would describe him as a smooth-talking swindler who specialized in selling things he didn't own. His favorite target? Immigrants. Parker was famous for repeatedly selling the Brooklyn Bridge to unsuspecting immigrants in New York who were excited at the idea of owning a national landmark. After convincing them it was a great idea, they would hand over their hard-earned cash, and Parker would in return hand over a worthless piece of paper, proving the great American showman P.T. Barnum's quote to be true, "There's a sucker born every minute." Parker eventually came to the attention of the law, was found guilty multiple times, and lived out his last years as a convict in Sing Sing, a prison on the banks of the Hudson River, just north of New York. The longest-reigning monarch is King Sobhuza II of Swaziland, who reigned for 84 years and 254 days. His reign was unusually long because he became the heir to the throne at just 4 months old in 1899 after his father's death. In order to stand in his place, his grandmother and uncle ruled as regents until he came of age and was sworn in as king in 1921. The earliest recorded customer complaint is written on a clay tablet from Mesopotamia, which is modern Iraq, dating back to approximately 1750 BC. It was written by a disgruntled customer named Nani to a merchant called Ea Nasir, where he details his dissatisfaction of the substandard quality of copper ingots he received. Apparently, the quality he received was not the same as what he was shown. He also complained about the ill treatment of his messenger, expressing discontent at how rudely he was treated. Although times have changed, frustration due to bad customer service remains the same, proving that some things never change. Alexander the Great named a city after his horse, Bucephalus. The city of Bucephalo was established in 326 BC after his horse died in the Battle of Hydaspes in what is now modern-day Pakistan. In 1698, Peter the Great implemented a beard tax on all men living in Russia as part of his campaign to modernize the country and align it with Western European ideals. A clean-shaven face was a big part of the look. So, in order to keep a beard, men had to pay a tax in exchange for a token as proof of payment, and those who couldn't afford it could be forcibly shaved. The policy faced resistance from many who believed beards were a religious requirement, and the Russian Orthodox Church initially opposed being clean-shaven. The beard tax was eventually repealed in 1772 by Catherine the Great, since the policy was deeply unpopular among many Russians who considered beards as a symbol of their masculinity. Hatshepsut was Egypt's most powerful female pharaoh, even more powerful than Cleopatra, and ruled in the 15th century BCE. In ancient times, women didn't hold much power in society, so to be taken seriously, she adopted the symbols of male kingship. Her statues show her with broad shoulders, the clothing of a man, and even a false beard. This disguise allowed her to maintain authority in a male-dominated world, leading Egypt into wealth and stability. Her reign was one of prosperity, filled with temples, trade, and monuments. She proved you didn't need a Y chromosome to wear the crown. Just a really good fake beard. Unfortunately, after her death, her successor destroyed her statues to obliterate her memory. Why does no one ever smile in old photographs? People always seem to have very morbid facial expressions, which are not very cheerful at all. Well, there's a reason for this, because back in the 1800s, when photography started becoming more accessible, showing off a big smile in front of the camera was seen as childish. Children were expected to behave like little adults during the Victorian era, and adults were certainly expected to act their age. When families came into photography studios in London and other cities to have their family portraits taken, they were quickly reprimanded if they tried to smile. The push to avoid smiling was so severe that one London photographer told people to say prunes right before they were having their pictures taken. Obviously, this prevented people from saying cheese, which would have widened the mouth and spread the lips into a smile. Instead, saying prunes allowed them to keep their mouths taut and their cheeks in a slim and appealing structure. Think of it like modern-day fish face selfies that tighten the cheeks, but from the Victorian era. Other photographers liked the results so much that prunes caught on everywhere, and for a long time that was the thing to say while getting one's picture taken. During the Jim Crow era, it wasn't uncommon for people to believe that African Americans were the most inferior group of people, and doctors especially believed that African American men were less likely to seek out medical attention and get treated for any ailments. So, researchers from the United States Public Health Services in 1932 set out to conduct an experiment aimed at observing the natural progression of untreated syphilis in the African American male population in Tuskegee, Alabama. There are very few studies in American history that rival the cruelty of the Tuskegee syphilis study of Alabama. Over 600 impoverished sharecroppers were enrolled, with about two-thirds of them having syphilis. Shockingly, they were kept in the dark about their diagnosis and misled into thinking they were receiving treatment for bad blood, a local term for various ailments. But in reality, no meaningful treatment was ever administered even after the discovery of penicillin in the 1940s, a proven and effective remedy for syphilis. The subjects were deliberately denied the antibiotic, ensuring the unbridled progression of the disease. Consequently, many men suffered fatal outcomes, developed severe health issues, and transmitted the disease to their spouses and children. The Tuskegee syphilis study persisted until 1972, when media exposure finally brought it to an end, concluding 4 decades of medical deception. This dark chapter left an indelible mark on medical research, prompting significant changes in ethical guidelines and the establishment of review boards to safeguard human subjects. At the height of their fame in the 1970s, the Beatles inspired some memorable Disney characters. In the 1967 animated film The Jungle Book, the 4 vultures that appear in the "That's What Friends Are For" scene are based on the members of the legendary band. Flap, the lead vulture, is inspired by Paul McCartney. Ziggy, the grumpy vulture, is based on John Lennon. Buzzy, the clumsy vulture, is inspired by Ringo Starr. And Dizzy, the dreamy vulture, is based on George Harrison. Check out this amazing coincidence between 3 physicists. The famous theoretical physicist Stephen Hawking was born on January 8, 1942, exactly 300 years after the death of Galileo Galilei, and died on the date that Albert Einstein was born. Amongst other things, Adolf Hitler was known to be a deeply superstitious man, and he was so interested in astrology that he allegedly consulted professional astrologers from time to time. During World War II, the British intelligence services tried to gain leverage by crafting up fake horoscopes based on his real birth date and time. These fake predictions wrongly predicted violent ends, reversals of fortune, and dangers from his closest associates. Now, to make sure they reached the right eyes and ears, British agents were dispatched globally to plant these fake predictions in local newspapers, knowing they would eventually be picked up by other news agencies and find their way back to Germany. The hope was that the sheer volume of negative celestial opinions would haunt Adolf, cause him to second-guess his decisions, and break the perception of him as a Superman. The famous luxury sports car Lamborghini was created by Ferruccio Lamborghini after a dispute with Enzo Ferrari. In 1963, Ferruccio became increasingly frustrated with the quality of his Ferrari, but was quickly dismissed after complaining to Enzo, fueling his ambition to build a superior sports car and directly compete with Ferrari to prove that he could bundle a superior machine. During the first dynasty of ancient Egypt, people believed that the afterlife was a continuation of life on Earth. Because the pharaohs and high-ranking officials desired to keep living the same lifestyle, they were often buried with pets, servants, family, and even concubines. The bodies show no signs of violent struggle, leading Egyptologists to believe these people and animals were likely poisoned or strangled just before or at the time of the burial ceremony. Thankfully, this practice was abandoned by the Second Dynasty and was replaced with symbolic substitutes for practical and ideological reasons. In ancient Rome, the punishment for killing one's father was to be drowned in a sack, along with a viper, a dog, and a rooster. The reason behind this? I have no idea. For a brief period in the 1700s in Paris, women wore hats with lightning rods attached to them when venturing outdoors during bad weather. Needless to say, this was a very bad idea. The first police woman was Alice Stebbins Wells, who joined the LAPD in 1910 after campaigning for the inclusion of women in the police force. Because she was the first and only policewoman, she designed her own police uniform. 4 years later, Britain had their first woman policeman, Edith Smith. In 1386, a French pig was arrested, imprisoned, and then put on trial for mauling a child. He was eventually found guilty and sentenced to capital punishment by public hanging, mirroring human punishments for similar crimes. It might sound utterly ridiculous, but medieval Europe was a different time. Pigs and other animals were often put on trial for committing crimes in the Dark Ages of Europe, and because Europeans were so ignorant in their beliefs back then, it was a common belief that animals had moral agency and could commit sins, requiring formal, legal, and religious accountability to restore community order. The accused animal would often receive a lawyer, a formal court process, and execution. Sometimes they would even be dressed up in human clothing, reflecting a worldview where cosmic justice extended to all creatures. Eventually, these trials became less common as the revival of Roman law emphasized that animals lacked rationality and couldn't be tried as humans could. The Egyptian Empire stands as one of the largest in human history, where pharaohs wielded unparalleled power, leading some of their actions to verge on insanity. Pepe II began his reign as a pharaoh of the 6th dynasty in Egypt's Old Kingdom at the tender age of 6, taking the place of his older brother, Merenre. Notably, Pepe holds the record as the longest reigning monarch, with sources indicating a remarkable 94-year rule. But beyond his extensive reign, he is also remembered for some peculiar actions. Preserved letters reveal his request to Harkhuf, governor of Aswan, to capture a politely presented dancing pygmy to entertain the court during expeditions into Nubia. Also, the pharaoh really didn't like flies, so he had his workers cover themselves in honey in order to act as human fly traps, drawing the flies away from him and towards their own honey-covered bodies. But even though Pepe II despised them, flies were not universally hated in Egypt. They were so annoying that they were sometimes considered symbols of tenacity, with golden fly amulets awarded to soldiers. More than 200 years after his death, at the end of 1997 going into early 1998, over 1,200 bone fragments belonging to approximately 10 to 15 human bodies were discovered in Benjamin Franklin's former London house, hidden away in a mysterious windowless room beneath the garden, at least some of which were children. Forensic investigations dated the remains to Franklin's lifetime in the 1700s. It's not believed that the founding father of America was a serial unaliver or anything like that, but rather it suggested the bodies were used for the study of anatomy, a practice that was legally restricted at the time, hence the secrecy and burial. This discovery revealed a hidden aspect of medical history in Franklin's life, and the house at 36 Craven Street, London, has now turned into a museum. Can you believe that in England there was a time period where English was not the official language? And for 300 years, England did not have a king who spoke English as his native language. In 1066, when William, Duke of Normandy, conquered England, he replaced the Anglo-Saxon aristocracy with French-speaking nobles. The royal court, administration, and law courts adopted French as their official language. For centuries, French was considered the language of the cultured, refined nobility, whereas English was spoken by the commoners and peasants. The shift back to English occurred in the 14th century when a war with France created a divide between the English crown and the French crown, fostering a new sense of English identity. And finally, with the crowning of King Henry IV, the English language made a comeback and became the official language of England once again. During the Qing dynasty, a time period between the mid-1600s and early 1900s, all Chinese men were forced to wear the Manchu Q hairstyle, which required shaving the perimeter of the head and leaving the center to grow into a long braid. The hairstyle was meant to be a symbol of loyalty and proof that men pledged their allegiance to the Qing dynasty. Any man who did not comply was seen as a traitor and punished with execution. The law was harshly enforced, with many Chinese men simply refusing to shave their heads, viewing it as a violation of Confucian filial piety since they were accustomed to long hair. One resistor, quoted in Wakeman, was arrested in 1647 and told that his crimes would be forgiven if he were to just accept the hairstyle. He responded by saying, "To cut off my head would be a small matter. To shave my head would be a great matter." He was beheaded shortly after. When the Qing dynasty finally fell in 1911, cutting the long braid became a powerful act of rebellion and a visual declaration of support for the new Republic of China, symbolizing modernization and the rejection of the imperial past. The original name for Disney's The Lion King was The King of the Jungle, but the producers decided to change it since lions don't actually live in the jungle. Napoleon Bonaparte fought 62 major battles and won 52. That means he won 83% of the battles he ever fought. So statistically, he's the greatest general in history, right? Nobody comes even close. He controlled most of Europe and was richer than any modern billionaire in current times. If you owned that much land today, you'd be extremely powerful. And yet, what's he remembered for? Waterloo. One loss. That's it. One mistake. The lesson here is that even the titans fall. You can conquer continents, rewrite history, and still be reduced to your worst day. Think about that. Ancient Romans used urine as detergent for clothing and for whitening their teeth. And it was actually very effective. In fact, urine was such a valuable commodity that Emperor Vespasian taxed all public urinals, generating a significant income that was used to fund the building of the Colosseum. When he was criticized for putting a tax on pee, he famously remarked that money doesn't stink. When urine is left to stand, the urea breaks down into ammonia, a powerful alkaline cleaning agent. The Romans discovered that ammonia was excellent for removing grease and stains, especially from clothing. Professional cleaners would soak clothes in vats of urine, which they then trampled by foot to work the liquid into the fabric before being rinsed clean. Some Romans would even mix urine with other abrasive substances to form a whitening toothpaste. Although this practice was sometimes viewed as barbaric to foreigners, the underlying principle of using ammonia for cleaning was sound, leading to its use in laundry and teeth whitening. It may sound disgusting today, but for the Romans, urine was just another useful household resource, and one that helped keep their iconic white togas white and bright. 80 years later, there are still unexploded bombs from World War II that are still being found. During the war, millions of bombs were dropped across Europe. Not all of them exploded. Some buried themselves deep underground, where they've remained hidden for decades. Countries like Germany, the UK, and France regularly discover these bombs during construction projects. When one is found, entire neighborhoods are evacuated, sometimes tens of thousands of people, while bomb disposal teams defuse it. Germany alone uncovers thousands of unexploded bombs every year, and some are so large they can still cause massive destruction if they detonate. These bombs are especially dangerous because their fuses become more unstable over time, not safer. More than 75 years after the war ended, World War II still interrupts daily life, reminding people that its physical dangers never fully disappeared. The idea that Vikings wore helmets with horns and wings is actually a myth, a very recent one. No horned Viking helmets have ever been found in battle contexts. Archaeologists have uncovered real Viking helmets, and they're very practical, made of iron, with a rounded shape and sometimes with a nose guard. Horns would have been too dangerous in combat because they give enemies something to grab and could throw someone off balance. So where did the horns come from? Well, in the 1800s, costume designers working on Wagner's operas wanted Viking characters to look more dramatic and intimidating on stage. Horns looked powerful, so they added them, even though it wasn't historically accurate. The real Vikings were far more practical than mythical. They cared about mobility, protection, and efficiency, not theatrical flair. A horned helmet would have been a liability in a real fight. Over 2,000 years ago, Roman engineering was so superior that some of the roads they built are still being used today. A lot of modern roads even follow the original routes, and some are even built directly on top, thanks to their layered, durable construction and strategic straight-line planning that proved to be incredibly long-lasting. You can still walk on original paving stones on routes like the Via Appia near Rome, built in 312 BC, where historic sections are preserved alongside ruins. When World War I broke out in 1914, Flora Murray and Louisa Garrett Anderson, both qualified doctors and life partners, tried to join the Armed Forces Medical Services but were flat out rejected because they were women. Instead of backing down, they built their own hospital, staffed entirely by women, surgeons, anesthesiologists, nurses, the full medical team. Their all-female hospital quickly earned a reputation as the best treatment center for wounded soldiers in the entire UK, proving that sexism didn't stand a chance against their skill and determination. Only 5 people were there to witness the first-ever powered flight taken by the Wright brothers on the 17th of December 1903 at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. It was the first time any human being had ever flown an aircraft, and it wasn't even captured on video for millions of people to see. It's crazy to think that one of the most groundbreaking moments in history happened almost in secret. For centuries, people in Europe believed that tomatoes were poisonous, and for good reason. When tomatoes first arrived in Europe, rich people started getting sick, and tomatoes were blamed. Wealthy Europeans often ate off of pewter plates, which contained dangerously high levels of lead. Tomatoes are acidic, and when the tomato juice touched the plates, it caused the lead to leach into the food. People would then get lead poisoning, experiencing symptoms like vomiting or even death. The tomato appeared to be the killer, but the real culprit was the plate. Tomatoes were even called poison apples and were grown only for decoration in some places. The myth lasted for centuries until people realized the plates were dangerous, not the fruit. In 1820, an American reportedly ate a basket of tomatoes in public to prove they were safe, and lived. Today, the poisonous tomato is one of history's biggest food misunderstandings. The oldest McDonald's still in operation today is in Downey, California, and opened its doors way back in 1953. Unlike most McDonald's outlets, this one wasn't franchised by Ray Kroc, the man who turned McDonald's into a global empire. Instead, it was run by the original McDonald's brothers, which meant it kept its retro charm and didn't modernize with the rest of the chain for decades. It wasn't until 1990 that the corporation finally bought it out, ending its run as the last independent McDonald's standing. This place is basically a living museum of fast food history. Before the invention of radar, how did armies detect incoming enemy aircraft? They didn't use their eyes. They used giant mechanical ears known as acoustic locators or war tubas. These were humanity's first anti-aircraft systems. Massive horns were aimed at the sky to capture sound. They could amplify the faint drone of an engine up to 15 miles away. An operator would listen through tubes, swiveling the horns to pinpoint the plane's direction. It was a brilliantly bizarre acoustic early warning system, but this strange technology became obsolete almost overnight when the development of radar instantly made these giant listening devices a relic of the past. We picture Spartans as nothing but brutal, humorless warriors, but that stereotype misses the full story. While their rigorous training was famously harsh, it wasn't just about combat. Young Spartan boys were also taught singing, dance, and poetry. But the biggest shock comes from the status of Spartan women. While other Greek women were hidden away, Spartan women were trained to be seen. They competed in their own public athletic games, including running and wrestling. Even more, they could legally inherit and own property. At its peak, Spartan women personally owned nearly 40% of all land in Sparta. History is full of surprises. If today amazed you, imagine what's still hidden. Like, subscribe, and join us next time for more forgotten stories.